Hello, and welcome to the Things I've Learned from Barry Harris. This is episode 16. We'll be talking about comping, or ideas for comping over the standard How High the Moon, which in a previous episode we talked about the scales. And the episode before this, we talked about practicing your scale of chords 6 diminished major in a couple of different keys. We did G6 diminished, we did C6 diminished, but another one you're going to need to know is D6 diminished. Now we're just going to focus on the first 4 bars of comping. So we'll say it's G major for 2 measures, then it's a G minor 7 to C7. Now when we're doing scales, Barry just says think of it as G major and then C7. But when we're comping, we think of it in a slightly different way, using some of the ideas that he's given us with our scale of chords. So, just to take the first part, we'll just say we'll just do a couple of G6. We'll do a couple of G6 inversions with the diminished in between, and we'll see how that sounds. So here's our tempo: 1, 2, 1, 2. So I just did a couple. Diminished, but then I ended on G minor. Okay, so let's try another one. So let's say 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that's just another little 2-bar thing or 4-bar thing to take us into the F major. So that was another inversions of G6 diminished. Now this time let's start on a diminished. Let's see what happens. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Still works. See? Or maybe we'll surround. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Just different ways to look at it. And all I'm playing is either a diminished or a C6. That's it. In drop 2. I'm sorry, G6. In drop 2. That's it. Slight different variations. You know, they're just different ideas. I don't know if I've ever played those before, but just trying to give you an example of what you're supposed to think of when you know that. Now, one movement that Barry plays that he talks about is the G6 obviously is important, but also over G major, he likes to play D6 because D6 brings in, there's the 5th of G, there's the 9th of G, the major 3rd, and then there is the major 7. So he likes to play D6 over G major, so which is nice. But a nice little movement you could play is D6 into G6, which would be, here's a D6, and here's a G6. So here's your D6 again, and there's your G6. So if you do it rhythmically, let's say 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's a pretty little movement, D6 to G6. So you should know all the inversions of D6 to G6. And once again, like the closest way to get to it. There's another D6. There's G6. There's the change again. Here it is here. D6 to G6. Another one. So those are all little things you can do. Same thing for F. Little things to practice. Now, in between D6 and G6, these 2 notes are lowering the whole step. So what's interesting is if you lower them a half step, now you have another diminished. So sometimes he adds that. See, they all work. And if you do them for each one, so let's say, see, So you're just trying to figure out different rhythmic things to do with it. So that's D6 with a diminished and then a G6, which is a pretty little thing. Now, there's another change that he plays sometimes that you can hear Bud Powell play and different piano players play it. We talked about it in one of the episodes and talking about the first 4 bars of the blues, and that is this: a C6 to a C sharp diminished to a G6. So you get this change. So now, if you play that in a single note form, you should also know how to do it in chording. So here's your C6, and this, remember, this is still over the first 2 bars of G major 7. So he'll say 1, 2, 3, 4. So now I did C6 to the C sharp diminished to G6, and then I did our D6 back to G6. Now, do you see just within that little framework of just the 2 bars, all those different little movements that I put in, instead of just playing one chord or which is fine, you can play one chord, but this is what I'm talking about. If you know all these little movements, you can make your comping a lot more interesting. I find that Barry's his solo work obviously is wonderful. His soloing is fantastic, but his comping behind people, like in his recordings with Coleman Hawkins, is so beautiful. I mean, anytime he's comping, but the ones with Coleman Hawkins in particular are really beautiful. But see, these are the kind of little movements that he plays all the time. And his thing, once again, is always talking about movement. This little movement, that little movement, and really practicing a lot. So anyway, we just did this, the C6 to the C sharp diminished to G6. So we should know all the inversions of that. See, and you should be able to do any one of them. So we'll say, let's say 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. So I did it again. I did the C6 to diminished, and then I did to the G6, and then a D6 back to the G6. Or I could have done with the diminished in between. But all those little movements. And what's kind of hard is, obviously, if a tune is fast, it's hard to throw in all those different chords. So maybe sometimes you just do them in, you learn what's the movement. What notes are moving. So you play the 6th instead. So you say, or even in this case, here's the movement. Because sometimes it's easier to just do 2 notes. So I'll try that. 1, 2. Okay, so now that is just the first 4 bars of playing How High the Moon. And if you think about it, just to learn how to practice G6, diminished, major 6, C major 6 diminished, and D major 6 diminished. And you see all those little things that we've practiced, plus you have the movement of going from D6 to G6, which uses a different diminished. Then you have the exercise of playing C6 going to G6, but using that diminished in between, which is really pretty. It's a raised 4 diminished, really pretty. So all those different movements, and there's a bunch of others too, obviously, that I'm, either not that good at or haven't really researched that much, but I'd love to hear them. If you guys have a different way of approaching the first 4 bars, that's great. I'd love to learn more about them. But anyway, I think that's pretty good if you just work on the first 4 bars, and then obviously move it down a whole step, and then see what you get from there. But that's the kind of thing you should be thinking about when comping, instead of just thinking about playing one chord for 2 bars or whatever the case may be. The other thing is, and I can't stress this enough, is that Barry always talks about rhythm. Rhythm, rhythm, rhythm. So even if you practice something small, like just playing G6, but seeing where it feels, let's say if you're coming in on, obviously you can come in on 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. But Barry likes to come in on the end of 4 sometimes. 1, 2, 3, 4. See, there's the end of 4. Sometimes he comes in on 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Right on 4. It sounds early, but that's okay. It's also, he does that with soloing too, where instead of playing just this particular scale over the chord that's actually happened, he starts to play that chord maybe 2 beats beforehand. So he's already anticipating that change. So those are other things to think about. This is what I mean about his method being totally limitless. There's no way you can practice all the things. So that's why you take your small little thing, whatever you want to practice, and really work on it a lot. Get it all over your instrument so that it becomes part of your language. So, okay. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. A little taste in comping and trying to get some of these 6 diminished scale chords together. And yeah, enjoy practicing comping for How High the Moon. Thanks again.